everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are doing Psalm 27 this week. And Psalm 27 was written by David again, like we saw with Psalm 25. Now, it's possible that this psalm was written earlier in David's life, maybe even before he was anointed king, during the time that he was on the run from Saul. Saul tried to kill David several times and even chased after him with the army of Israel for many years, even though David was married to Saul's daughter and best friends with Saul's son, Jonathan. So we see in verses 1 to 3 that David started his prayer with praise to God. He said, "The Lord is my light and my salvation." And salvation means deliverance from danger or death. And then David said, "The Lord is the stronghold of my life." And a stronghold represents a place of refuge and security. David was saying he had no reason to fear the plans of men because God is stronger, God is wiser, God is greater, God is above all things. And then we saw in Romans 8:31, Paul said the same thing. If God is with us, who can be against us? Psalm 118:6 is another great verse about this. "The Lord is with me, I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me?" So these are verses to give you courage. This kind of courage and confidence comes when we truly abide in the Lord. That's a relationship where we are with Him. We are walking in the Spirit. We are in a daily presence and we seek His face. His constant presence in our life brings security. In verses 4 to 10, David expressed his abiding relationship with God by saying that the constant presence of God in his life was like dwelling in the house of the Lord. And dwell gives us a really good picture of living life together, of being in each other's lives, in each other's presence all the time, and being with each other always. So throughout the Old Testament, God promised to dwell with Israel and to be their God, to be in their presence, to be with them always, and to be in their daily life. And David desired this kind of presence with the Lord in his life. And David said, "Your face, Lord, will I seek." He said, "Do not hide yourself from me, Lord. Do not take your presence away from me. Do not leave me alone." And then in verses 11 to 14, he continued on, because to be in God's presence, we have to live a life of righteousness. God's presence is a blessing that requires our obedience. So David asked God to teach him his ways, to lead him in the right path, so that David could walk with God and enjoy his salvation. And remember, salvation meaning deliverance from trouble. It means more than our eternal salvation. It means deliverance here in our daily life while we're here in this world. So because David was abiding in the Lord, and he was a man after God's own heart, we know that's been said of David. And what that really means is that David was a man who sought after God's heart, who sought after God's presence. And because that was his life, he could confidently proclaim God's goodness, and he could take courage from God's presence. And at the end of the psalm, it says, "Take heart and wait for the Lord." So our point to ponder this week is that women of the Word take courage from God's presence. Women of the Word take courage from God's presence. The last statement from David in the psalm was really a pep talk for his soul. He was saying, I will choose to be confident in the Lord. I will choose to be strong. I will choose not to be discouraged. I will choose to take heart, because courage is a choice. It's not a feeling. In fact, courage is a choice not to give in to the fear that we are actually feeling in that moment. We can be courageous because of God's presence with us, His promise to always be with us. In Joshua 1:9, God tells us to be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. And in verse 5, God promises that He will never leave us or forsake us. And this is actually my life verse. The Lord gave it to me during a time that I was going through a fearful situation. I had just found out that I tested positive for Huntington's disease. And every time I thought about it, I would get a knot in my stomach and I would be terrified about what was going to happen to me. But then I would say this verse, and I would say it out loud. And I just knew that God would always be with me, that no matter what, in the good and the bad, whatever came into my life, that I would not be alone. And that is what gave me courage to keep going and to not let my life be defined by that fear. So what situation is making you fearful? What can you do to seek God's presence right now or in that moment? Maybe it's to start praying. Maybe it's to sing a worship song. Maybe you need to read this psalm to yourself. Read it out loud, or say these verses, say Joshua 1:5 or 1:9 over yourself and say, God, I know that you will never leave me or forsake me. Maybe you need to write down your feelings in a journal, just like David did with this psalm. And then write out God's promises that He will be your stronghold and He will be your salvation. The presence of the Lord on a daily basis is a tremendous gift that He wants us to enjoy. I am praying that this study helps you to spend time in the presence of the Lord, seeking the face of Jesus, being blessed and strengthened by His presence in your life. So be strong and take heart.